Welcome to Backstage with Richard Ridge. My guest is one of the most influential award-winning architects of the 20th century, and he is the founder of the Rockwell Group and is one of Broadway's most sought-after set designers, who this season is nominated for a Tony Award for his stunning set design for Roundabout Theatre Company's glorious new production of She Loves Me. Please welcome David Rockwell. Welcome. Thanks for sitting with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming by.
So is this your theater room? Where are we, David?
We are in the theater room.
I love this.
Isn't it a great room? It is my favorite room.
You know, you design everything from hospitals, hotels, public spaces, restaurants, and of course, Broadway sets.
Right.
What's the difference between architecture and set design?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'll try and be as succinct as I can. I think what's interesting is first to say how they're similar. Mm-hmm. And how they're similar, from my point of view, is they're both about storytelling. They're both about creating environments to connect people. But they're very different toolboxes. So the toolbox of an architect is much more about permanent structures. And in theater, you know, what strikes me is you're putting all of that amazing effort, the whole team, into that 2 or 2.5 hours experience of live theater. So what I find has engaged me from my earliest days in design is that design is a way to take a community of people and connect them. So the tools you use are quite different, but the actual intention, I think, is quite similar.
So how did one of the greatest architects of the 20th century start designing for Broadway?
Well, I'm not sure who you're referring to, but I'll tell you how I started.
Love it.
So my early interest in design, and you know, I really do believe most designers and most creative individuals pursue what they do organically, and then if you have an opportunity to look in the rearview mirror, you can start to say how it connects. So now, having had my studio here for 32 years in New York, I'm able to look back and get some objectivity on kind of what drove me into what I do. But as a kid growing up, and particularly as a kid who had a lot of transitions, we moved a lot. I grew up in Chicago up until I was 3.5. My dad passed away and my mom remarried. And so my mother, my stepdad, and 4 brothers and I was the youngest, all moved to the Jersey Shore as a group. We moved around to several homes there, and I found that building and making was a way I could communicate. So I always had a room, which was a lot like this 5th floor room, that was a place to experiment and play. And I think play is so important, giving permission to play. So that was kind of, I guess, my way into to connecting. So whether it was making a low-tech spook house or a carnival or a slide or a construction, always from detritus from around the neighborhood, and always a sort of community build project. There was always a sense of wanting other people to do that. That instinct, I think, got ignited when my mom helped to start, as corny as it sounds, the Deal Community Players. And so in this very sleepy suburb of New Jersey, which was all private homes, I found in the summer it turned out to be this acting out community where everyone wanted to be in the show. So I just became sort of enamored with the way this activity brought that community together. And of course, it gave me a chance to see my mom in a different light as she was starting to choreograph these things. And I actually went back recently with my daughter to look at the place in Deal where, you know, my memory is The King and I rival Joe Melzener's vision or Michael Jurgen and Bart Scher's amazing vision. And it was the teeniest room. And I took a picture of Lola on the stage because I think it goes to memory and how, you know, we had these indelible memories of live experience that are so important, I think, to us as human beings. And so I became a part of this theater community, and everyone in my family did something. And those who couldn't act made, those who couldn't make painted, those who couldn't paint managed. So that was kind of my earliest instincts in design. When I was 12, I came into New York. I went to Schrafft's, and I had never been to a New York City restaurant. So I was sort of blown away by the sense of ritual and sitting around a table with four brothers, the five of us eating, and realizing it wasn't a competitive art form to see who could get the last piece of chicken. So there was the experience in the restaurant, there was the experience of the streets in New York, and I knew immediately that so much of what I fell in love with in the city was the energy. And then I went to see Fiddler on the Roof, and it was a life-changing experience in many, many ways. Truly, I was hooked.
The sets for She Loves Me are absolutely stunning, just to live in that world. I mean, you must have had the time of your life designing that for Roundabout.
I had the most amazing time. I've got to tell you that Scott Ellis, when he approached me, I didn't know the show. Scott's an incredible director and a great collaborator. So I listened to the album, I read the script, and I, of course, said yes. Scott's first mandate to me was he had to find a different way in than the first revival that he had done. So we began, like we do any project, with intense, deep research. And research led to, the period of Art Nouveau was the most amazing period. Because it straddled, it moved from the more historically accurate styles to modernism. And it had this explosion of color and energy. So we looked at Art Nouveau, we looked at stores, we looked at movement, and started to talk about, was there a way that the show, having the inner life of the people and what they express, and you don't really find out at the end that these two people who fight the whole time are having a love affair with each other through letters. That we could express it in some ways by beginning the show with a view of Budapest and seeing the street life, and then have the store open up. And I'll tell you, it has been the most, every designer is in some ways obsessive about details. Yeah. And there's never been an opportunity to drill as deep down into my love of the show to every last detail. So there's hundreds of perfume bottles, 150 of them are custom made for the show, and that level of detail is all tailored to each one of the characters. So through the process of the show, they're falling in love with the environment as the cast is falling in love with them. And I get to fall in love with the whole thing.
I had the 4 stars 2 weeks ago, and they were all saying everything has to be latched back, like the stools have to be latched, the door has to be latched before things can close up, right?
Yeah, in fact, during rehearsal, it was interesting to see Scott Ellis and Warren Carlyle getting more and more elaborate in their choreography of the people through the transitions, so that every time something moves, there's 4 or 5 people moving in between those 2 axes of movement. So it is, from my experience, the most complex integration of automation and heavily painted scenery. Yeah. And one of the things that is an unbelievable thrill is how much it grows out of the music. We'd never worked with Paul, Jim, and Johnny before, who's just extraordinary. Yeah. And being in Studio 54, which I worked as an architect when I was 26, and I think the same leopard carpeting was still there.
It is.
But hearing that beautiful yearning music as those pieces move, in fact, we started to think about them moving in 3s, which is the way a waltz is composed. So there's things open and close very much in earned from the music.
Well, you have designed, like you said, 20 sets,
Yeah.
at least for Broadway. So some of the most stunning sets I've ever seen. So let's go through some of your highlights and just tell me what comes to mind, a story or favorite memory, all right?
Okay.
Let's start with your first, which was the Rocky Horror Show.
Oh God, there's so many stories. Well, the first story with Rocky Horror Show was Jordan Roth introduced me to Chris Ashley, and they wanted to do the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I had never seen. I guess having spent time in Mexico from 12 to 18, but somehow I'd never been in the theater to see it. So I rented it. And I came in the next day and I said, so you got to explain this to me. There's something I'm missing.
Yeah.
And they said, what you're missing is the audience. That the Rocky Horror Show is about self-creation and the audience is part of it. So we were first going to do it in a different theater. We looked at different spaces, and I walked into Circle in the Square and met Paul Libin,
Yeah.
who's become a dear friend, and started to hook onto the idea of that the movement from the decayed movie palace to the world of Rocky Horror was going to include the audience. And that led us to putting the seats on the floor that had a center pivot, and when the show began, the entire floor pivoted around. And Paul Libin looked at me and he said, well, I don't know that you can do that. And I said, you can do that, I promise. So that was an out-of-body great experience.
Hairspray.
I sat at coffee shop with Jack O'Brien, who I had just met, and Jerry Mitchell, and we listened to the music. And of course, I fell in love with it, and I started designing. And I remember Jack came into a room where I had boards for every scene in the play for our first meeting. And he looked around and he put his arm around me. He said, let's take everything out of the room except for those things that make you fall in love with Tracy. Let's start with that. And it was a sort of great lesson in storytelling.
Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Well, we teched Dirty Rotten Scoundrels in San Diego, and that's where it premiered. And it had two turntables that were concentric. You know, one of the things I found really interesting about Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is how deceptively complex the music was. And we had a continuous horizon that went from dark blue to light blue, that cut across all the legs, that established a sort of water to sea line. And in previews, I thought it looked really good, but I had an idea to try something that would amp it up a little bit. So I got a panel of glass beads, retro-reflective beads, and put that up. And when Ken Posner saw the way that reflected light, that became the key to a lot of the design, that we were going to embed jewels and crystals and things like palm trees in unexpected places, so that the sense of these guys who were creating the heist would embed itself in many different surprising ways.
Legally Blonde.
Well, Legally Blonde went through many iterations in design. And what we ultimately discovered in playing with design and research is we wanted to, and it wasn't totally intuitive to me at the beginning, we wanted to create a world in which her California pink fantasy was another version of Harvard. It was, neither one was a cartoon. So that led to the portals, the proscenium portal and three other portals being light boxes, where they were front painted is wood grain, and then all you had to do was backlight them and you'd see through them, they become glowing pink. So the notion that those worlds were not that far apart was what we drove for in the design.
Love that.
I'll tell you another story, which is the Chihuahua Bruiser had many sort of incredible little stage adventures, and the way he would know where to go was through a piece of carpet we would put on the deck. So we got into rehearsal, and he wouldn't do it. And Bill Berloni said, I don't think Bruiser likes pink. It's pink carpet. I said, well, did Bruiser read the script? It's a pink show. So we had to get Bruiser to embrace pink.
Well, let's talk about 20th Century while we're talking about it. Beautiful. The show curtain for that. I mean, that's one of the most elaborate show curtains you've ever done, isn't it?
It is definitely the most elaborate show curtain
Yeah.
we've ever done. You know, 20th Century is one of those shows that's remembered for many things, including the design.
Oh.
So I called up Robin Wagner and said, we've been offered the show, how do you feel about it? And he said, I think you should do it. I'd love to see it redone. So I wanted to find a different way into the look of the show. And the aha moment for me was looking at travel posters from that period. And the travel posters all had these extraordinarily dynamic angled lines, beams of light, and so as opposed to looking at the train as just a rectilinear piece, it gave us a chance to think about dynamic movement. And also, in looking at the 20th century, I think our image of it is all chrome, which is not what it was. So it was an invitation to use bronze and gold and chrome and many metals which William Ivey Long took as inspiration.
The Normal Heart.
Wow. Well, George called me about The Normal Heart. They had just done the reading, and it had to happen quickly.
Yeah.
And it's not a play I had seen before. And sat with George and read the play, and you know, he's an extraordinarily articulate director, and we talked about the fact that the play was about AIDS before there was language to describe it. It was before it was even called AIDS. Yeah. And words and language were such a critical part of both the people who weren't trying to help, and of course Larry Kramer's vital, angry voice about wanting to create change. I lost my brother Rick to AIDS, and so had a first-hand experience of not only losing him, but how it decimated so many parts of the creative industry, and had been chairman of DIFA for 12 years, which is Design Industries Foundation Fighting AIDS. And I think, you know, what George's direction meant to me was that the set in some ways could be a kind of, you know, a very abstract memory that celebrated both those who were lost and those who were changed by it. And it was an incredible cast, very simple set, but very powerful, where we used text as texture. So for the part of the show when it was just lit with grazing light, the words would appear to be brick or texture, and then as it was front lit, you could start to pull out, and it was all collaged together from writing from that period.
Kinky Boots.
For Kinky Boots, one of the things I thought we could contribute was a world that, and Jerry, of course, was very interested in this, where every part of the set was something that had to do with the making of shoes. That every machine, and it's one of the things I'm proudest about, is that cast loves their world. They love each piece that they're using. And so we did a huge amount of research into the sort of manufacturing of shoes in a factory from that period. And I didn't want to make it a sort of Technicolor cartoon of that world, but I thought the gritty reality, becoming other things, becoming Lola's world, becoming the Milan fashion show. And Jerry knew right from the beginning that he wanted these treadmills. Yeah. And we started by trying to find a treadmill that would do it, and no treadmill had variable speeds or remote control, so we started mocking that up 6 months before he needed it. Then we had it in rehearsal, and there, you know, it's like magic when that comes together.
Sylvia, what a beautiful love song to New York City.
I sat with Dan Sullivan, and we're both dog lovers, and I went to the part in Central Park that the play takes place in, and I proposed that if we could tell the play from the dog's point of view, in the sense that the park is the aspiration, the park is sort of freedom, and that led us to the first design move, was taking the deck and having the boards of the deck morph into the hills of Central Park, which was in some ways like shipbuilding. So those were boards that warped and changed, and you know, that was a case where the actors went up to Connecticut and walked on that deck to make sure that the rake wasn't too much. So it was a beautiful play to do, and I loved the idea of combining the world, blurring the line between the world of the apartment and the park. So you always can see the and you know, part of the issue was getting the right part of the view of Central Park that was iconic enough without being distracting.
If you could sum up the best part of the experience for you with working on She Loves Me, what's it been for you, David?
The best way to describe it is it's been sort of like a dream. It's unprecedented in my experience that that the design so seamlessly integrates with the detail of the storytelling. So that created a context in which there's really no favorite. I mean, one of I guess my favorite moments of the storytelling are moments in which the outer world is either opened or closed. So towards the end of the show, when Laura and Zach lower the blinds, and you see these drapes lower, very simple thing, but what they're doing is they're going from a deep view into an intimate view. And then they take the drop cloths that we made, these sheer drop cloths, and put them over the counter and sort of lovingly wrap up those counters. And then as they kiss, the house, as they kiss, the store closes and moves upstage and it starts to snow. It's kind of hard to beat that moment in terms of total integration of story and physical environment.
Living between the world of architecture and Broadway, everything you designed architecturally is still standing. And then you create the magic for Broadway, and after a run, it's all pulled apart and either destroyed or pieces are saved. How do you deal with that?
I think there's something really extraordinary about celebrating the moment. And I think the notion of creating things forever, things don't last forever. So I think, you know, part of that is the absence of something makes you want it more. So you sort of have to live with the memory. But it is, you know, theater is such an incredible family. She Loves Me makes everyone in the audience so happy. That, you know, this joyous family. And I think there are connections that happen from that that lead to the next thing. But I will definitely be in the back row.